John Atack, and this is Spike, and we are going to talk about, what are we going to talk about, Spike?
I thought we'd talk about feminism and cancel culture.
Cancel culture. I've got no idea what that means, so you better explain it to me.
Well, as far as I understand it, and I'm kind of out on the periphery of things, is that now when somebody has become somebody has become exposed as a rapist or a sexual assault person or somebody who just isn't very nice or whose reputation has not aged well through history, we now cancel them. We can't watch movies with them. We can't, your friend Kevin Spacey, just from one accusation that was then withdrawn, now we can't see House of Cards anymore.
He's not actually my friend. I just regard him highly as an actor.
But, I do too.
And I have met somebody who knows him who says he's a horrible person.
Oh.
But, that's not really relevant. He's not been found guilty of any offence. And
exactly. Just because you're an asshole doesn't mean that you're, Well,
I think a lot of people historically, there was a campaign way back in the 90s to stop people from seeing Tom Cruise movies based upon the idea that he was giving the money to Scientology. Well, Tom Cruise is not giving any money to Scientology. Let's get real about this. It's more likely to be the other way around. When you have a celebrity like Tom Cruise, you give them everything for free. He didn't pay for the field of wildflowers to be put down. I very much doubt he's paid for anything. And it's not really a reason to diss an artist. So, I think, contrary to the opinion of most ex-Scientologists, I think Tom Cruise has done some very fine films, many of which are about manipulation. For example, Magnolia, which is the best film I know about pickup artists, in which I think he is stunningly good.
I've actually never liked his style, but that's just me not liking his style.
Well, there's a question of what one would mean by style. He does tend to play a stereotypical character, but if you look at him in the character arc in Rain Man, he's having
I liked
to...
him in Rain Man. I liked him in Rain Man, and I liked him in Risky Business, and I hated him in Top Gun.
All right. I don't like Top Gun. Color of Money?
No, I never saw it, but what I did see of it, I didn't like.
So you've cancelled him?
Not so much I've canceled him. If anybody else wants to go and watch a Tom Cruise movie, and I will concede that some people think he's a good actor, I just, for my part, Mission Impossible, no thanks.
Not my kind of movie.
Not my cup of tea.
Jerry Maguire?
Not really my cup of tea.
Yeah.
But then again, I have a specific type of movie that I like, and otherwise I can really leave the rest of it all alone. I don't like you. I have not, go ahead and cancel me. I have not enjoyed any of the superhero movies that now seem to be ubiquitous in American culture, because to me the idea of a Marvel superhero is just stupid. Oh, we saved the world, but we destroyed 6 billion people to do it,
It's not a genre that I particularly enjoy, but
no, jerks in stupid outfits don't do anything for me.
Okay. I enjoyed Black Panther. I wasn't particularly impressed with the plot or anything, but because I saw it in an IMAX and was close to the screen, the being dropped down 200 feet was great good fun.
Now, the only superhero thing I've ever enjoyed was the 1990s animated Batman series, which was just literally a piece of art.
Okay.
If you know about it. As an artist, you should. It was drawn on black paper, whereas most animation of the day was done on white paper and then put dye on top of. It was all drawn on black paper.
Grand.
It's beautiful. It's just a very delicious. I'll put a clip up because it's a delicious piece of art.
Okay.
Whole series.
But
cancel culture.
Yeah, the point I'd like to continue making about Tom Cruise is that these are movies that are not only entertaining, but they are highly educational. The character that he plays in Rain Man, in Jerry Maguire, in Color of Money, and I can't imagine not watching a Paul Newman film all the way through. It's like the idea that Tom Cruise is in it, it's Paul Newman, and it's a follow-up to The Hustler, which is one of the great series of Paul Newman movies. But putting that aside, Magnolia is a movie that I recommend to people who want to understand authoritarian behavior. It's got the line, "How to fake like you are nice and caring" in it, which he instructs people to do. And the pickup culture has become much more relevant with the incel culture. Pickup artist hate, PUA hate, and such dreadful people as Elliot Rodger, who have a chapter coming out about
who
him.
wrote the mystery, or he's called Mystery, and he was a stage magician, and then wrote this secret about how to pick up, and the women are throughout the book called marks, and are just basically depersonalized, and he advocates dissing them, that is, putting them down, chipping at their self-worth.
Yeah,
in order to make their own
it's a misogynistic cult, but that he put light upon it. Again, I'm not a huge fan of The Simpsons, but it's culturally informed us. And there's Nancy Cartwright, so we can't watch that. I am a huge fan of South Park, including the episodes that have Isaac Hayes in, who left because of Scientology. I'm a huge fan of Isaac Hayes' earlier career. One of the great songwriters and performers of soul music. I mean,
I admit to have been extremely disappointed when I became entranced with the show My Name is Earl, which is a delightful ride. But then Wally, my husband, looks up and says, that guy's a Scientologist. I was like, oh no. But then why? Why should I? He's probably duped. Is he duped or is he complicit? That's...
And to what extent are we going to talk about culture in terms of the niceness of the human being that did it?
That's true. I mean, I love Wagner, but anybody who knows their history knows that Wagner...
He was slightly anti-Semitic.
Kind of the way that Rambo is slightly violent.
Stephen Fry is a huge fan of Wagner.
Yeah.
But he also drives a hansom cab, which probably most Americans have no idea of what a hansom cab is, but he drives one. The Black London Taxi.
Yeah, the Black London Taxi.
But I think...
Prowler.
Okay. There are many instances where, for example, Paul Gauguin, I was at the Royal Academy and saw that there were 2 Gauguins on the wall that I didn't know about. And that, having studied the guy in some depth, was a surprise to me. I'd never seen these 2 pictures illustrated. They're not significant. And I said to my friend, "Oh, look, 2 Gauguins." She said, "I'm not looking at them." I said, "Why not?" "He was a pedophile." "What do you mean?" He had sex with a 13-year-old girl. And you say, "Oh, well, that wouldn't actually have made him a pedophile."
No.
Because she's not a child. She was sexually mature. And I tried to explain to her that, firstly, there was no age of consent anywhere, almost. I mean, it was 12 in Britain by that time.
You're not going to listen to any Elvis then? Because how old was Priscilla when he married her?
I'm not sure. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis is more contentious. His wife was 14.
Yeah.
That ruined his career. But it's a different place and a different time. He was in Tahiti, and the girl chose him as her husband. And girls there, because the life expectancy was about 40, it was perfectly normal in their culture for girls of that age. So we have questions from where we sit, but am I not going to look at Gauguin paintings for that reason? Or Picasso. Picasso had quite a lot of children, but he claimed that he never paid a cent towards raising them because that would be a waste of money. Or Jackson Pollock, who was an alcoholic who went around harming people. There are a lot of artists who we could, if we started judging in that way, we'd push them aside.
Beethoven was an absolute jerk to his brother's wife, his brother's widow. He actually sued her for custody of of her child because he did not feel that she had the social standing to be a decent mother because she was of a lower class than his brother. But I still maintain he's one of the greatest composers ever lived. The problem is we have to separate the art from the artist. And also, like right now I was hearing there's still talk about Disney's Song of the South. Came out when I was a little youngster. I'm one of the people who actually remember seeing it. It was a cute little thing, but unfortunately had some rather racially insensitive bits.
You could say that, yeah.
Yeah, it was rather racially insensitive. I mean, all I remember is that these two kids loved this old man. I didn't even, at the time, little 7-year-old me, didn't notice that the old man that these kids was befriending was a different race and had all this history. All I knew was, oh, that guy's telling them some nifty stories. That's sweet. They're friends. That's all 7-year-old Spike got from that movie.
I mean, it could be said that 7-year-old Spike wasn't mature enough to understand the racism implicit in this.
Or even in Dumbo, which I loved as a child, still love as an adult for its animation. But there's that one scene where that crow, who is named Jim Crow and voiced by a white actor, well, look at it, hell, my, that is, I mean, hello. And yet you could say, well, yes, but these crows, even though they're horrible stereotypes, are the only friends that Dumbo's got and actually provide him with the wisdom to move the plot forward. And how much are we going to cancel that scene instead of, because when you cancel something and you take it away, you're not looking at it anymore. And the thing is, we are an evolving species. We used to think that it was okay to have gollywog dolls, you know, the blackface minstrel dolls, and we used to think that that was okay. We used to think that slapping women on the butt was a way to say, good job, babe. But we know now better. However, does that mean that we should never sing Baby It's Cold Outside? Hell no. It's a great song with some clever lyrics. Yes, it's rapey as all hell, but instead of canceling it, why not just say, okay, this is the way we were, and this is why we don't think that way anymore. Let it stand as an example of why we don't think that way anymore, but don't cancel it.
Well, I think there's a mid-ground, because I think 7-year-old Spike couldn't understand what's going on there. So in the UK, there are quite a number of sitcoms. It Ain't Half Hot, Mum, for example, which were excessively racist, and it seems right to me that they should not be shown again, other than within a context of explaining how racist they were. The black and white minstrel show, which was on television when I was a child, should not be shown again.
Oh, and also certain traditions, like when I was at UVM, there was still something called the cakewalk, where it had just been a decade before the people got up in blackface. You know, and do we do that anymore? No. Do we judge Mr. 70-year-old who used to do it when he was 19? Only if he's not going, only if he defends it and says, oh yeah, that was totally right. He'll say, no, I was stupid. That was how our culture was. I've moved on.
So what about high schools that are named for Robert E. Lee? What do you feel about that?
High schools change their names all the time. My high school was actually the South.
No, but should that name be cancelled or not?
I think it should be up to the students and the individual students involved. And I think it, like so many things, that's the problem, is we set up these hard and fast rules, but we don't realize that every single case is totally different with totally different things. Should they be canceled? I think it should be to a vote of the student body.
But the student body will only be there
okay, then the governors, the community, whoever is involved the most, maybe the teachers. Like, for instance, we had a little Confederate soldier with stars and bars on his hat for my high school mascot. I forget what they changed it to. but they changed it something else because we used to be called the South Burlington Rebels because South Burlington broke away from the city of Burlington, so we were rebels. We-haw.
And so associated with Johnny Reb.
Yeah, even though it really wasn't.
So what about in this country a few weeks ago, a statue of a man called Colston was pulled down in Bristol. And
I liked what you got. Was it you and Eddie who said put them all in a park and put a little plaque as to what they actually did? Don't disappear the statue. Don't put it down the 1984 memory hole, but actually use it as an example of we used to think this horrible thing. We used to do this horrible thing. In a couple hundred years, there'll probably be stuff that we're going to be judged for because human beings evolve.
Yeah, but if we're judged for the murders and rapes we committed,
that's
one thing.
Yeah, actual rapes and murders. However, and I'm not even sure. I promised I would look this up for you, and I still haven't gotten around to it. Of somebody actually knocking down a statue of somebody who was an abolitionist, because to quote the great Tommy Jones in Men in Black, a person is intelligent. People are dumb, stupid animals, and you know it.
Oh, Gustave Le Bon in The Crowd in around about 1890 something, where he says a crowd has the intelligence of the stupidest person in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that there are reasons to say, for example, Christopher Columbus.
Oh, God.
Christopher Colon, if we give him his actual name. I don't know why. It's not the District of Colonix, Washington,
or
but
any American citizen. This fellow here, genocidal murderer, and yet he's still on our money.
Well, Thomas Jefferson recommended that the Native American population be erased, and wrote the Bill of Rights.
Yeah. I think the fact is that we're trying to make consistency where the fact is we're not consistent beings. We just aren't. Before we turned on record, we were talking about Mother Teresa, who's usually viewed as almost a saint, but
she is in fact a saint.
Oh, that's right. See,
she's been sanctified, yeah.
Yeah, non-Catholic child of lapsed Catholic parents. I don't keep track of these things.
Yeah. Saint Mother Teresa.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, she's part of a promotional exercise for the Roman Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who worked with her who say finding somebody who's dying on the streets, offering them a bed so that you can convert them to your faith, might be considered as rather more cynical than saintly. But, Catholic Church has other and far worse problems to deal with, like giving all the money to the poor, for example, as Jesus suggested. That doesn't seem to be happening. But it also has the incredible sculpture of Bernini and the work of Michelangelo to show off, so something good came from it. But
my point is that I have seen with a lot of other women who feel them. I mean, for people's edification here, but for the folks at home, I was raised in a house of lesbians. I had two moms, and I was raised in a house in 1980s Burlington, Bernie's Burlington, and Reagan's America, and the house was always filled with women who spelled it with a YN, who every male was suspect. I mean, we had a physics professor renting the room downstairs who really honestly, every man was the enemy.
Spare rib feminism, as it's sometimes
was,
known.
And it even interfered with their own goodness, in that little 13-year-old Spike was telling them about the novel that I was writing and was so excited. And they were saying, yeah, well, the world's going to blow up, Reagan's going to kill us all. I said, oh, no. They survived the nuclear holocaust, and then they have a renaissance. And as soon as I dropped the word renaissance, their faces went, They burned women as witches, as in the so-called Renaissance. And instead of encouraging this 13-year-old girl who's writing a novel, it turned into this lecture on the burning times, which were real. And yes, it's a horrible thing that happened. But
it was largely actually within Protestant culture, not within Catholic culture. So, and it's also largely post-Renaissance. I'd like to point out, just as a historical note, in the 17th century, 18th century.
Yes. But the thing was, instead of any historical accuracy, they were always focusing on their anger and their outrage. And I mean, yes, I have, and I will say, very few men can really understand all the shit a woman has to put up with just for being a woman. But your average man is not the one who's doing it. It's those guys who we're now calling nice guys or neckbeards. There's all sorts of wonderful unfair nicknames for these guys who, it's just one creepy guy who's going and doing all the creepy stuff to the women, and yet all his brothers are getting blamed. Just as for men, all it takes is one woman being totally psycho, and all of a sudden all men go, we can't figure out women. I don't know what women want. It's like, that's because we're all different people. Not you. Once you know what one woman wants, you're not going to know what all women want. And yet I've heard that from man after man after man. I don't know what women want. What do women want? Why are women this big mystery? They're a totally different species. It's like, no, we're not. You're just trying to understand all of us instead of taking us all as our own individual people.
Let's pull back.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I want to
is making the generalization of men and women.
Yeah.
So you've already created two camps, whereas in fact,
it's not two camps.
No, there is a spectrum between maleness and femaleness.
Oh yeah.
And we've been given all sorts of nonsense. For example, for some years we've been told that male and female brains are different.
Yeah.
That's an accepted mythology, which various female neuroscientists have tried to point out is a mythology. There are differences between individuals. Exactly. So any attempt to group either way, to say all men do this or all women do this, or men tend to do this, women tend to do this, it's like women can't park cars because their spatial sense is so poor. Women are from Venus and men are assholes.
No.
All of the generalizations, the gender generalizations, collapse because maleness and femaleness is not the significant difference. The significant difference is largely cultural, I believe. Cultures, in some African cultures, some tribal cultures to this day, women work and men drink.
Yeah.
That's a tradition in some cultures. But there are other cultures where men work and women drink.
One of my favorite sci-fi franchises is Alien Nation, which had some wonderful gender parables in it, because in their culture, the women, it was a matriarchal culture and the women were more in charge. And also it required two men to impregnate a woman rather than one. And there were all sorts of different things, but very interesting in and also the men hold the baby for the second half of the pregnancy. The pod's transferred from male to female halfway along pregnancy, and then you've got pregnant men. So very, very fun to see that, because I have never been what people think of as traditionally female. I mean, Spike is hardly a girly name. I don't have the regulation amount of shoes. When a baby comes into the room, I'm not all drooling over it like most women I see. I used to work at a bank, and every time anybody brought a baby in, all the women would be like that, all over it. And I would be like, seems like an untidy way to start a life to me.
But I mean, you would therefore be classified in my childhood as a tomboy. And
Yes, and in mine too.
yeah, and there is a view that a larger amount of testosterone in the womb will create certain characteristics which will be more what are considered to be male. And this is where I have a problem, that
Mm-hmm.
saying that there's a spectrum from male to female is wrong.
Mm.
There is a spectrum, if you like, from yin to yang. There are a set of characteristics that are accepted, but I know women who are, you know, masculine in their characteristics, and I know men who are feminine in their characteristics, and it offends me that those are the words that are used to define them.
Most people would characterize my husband as feminine in a lot of his characteristics.
Because he's a gentle man.
He's a very, very gentle man.
But he's not an effeminate man.
No. However, I will say that once upon a time, I did date a fellow who I thought was gay at first when I first met him. In fact, that's how I met him. I thought he was with a male friend of mine. I thought he was that guy's date. So I went right up to him, threw my arms around him, gave him a great big kiss, and told him, "Where have you been, darling?" Turned out he wasn't gay, and we dated for about 1.5 years.
And we have the so-called metrosexual.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to judge people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, as a man once said.
Mm-hmm.
So to stop making any broad generalizations in this area leads us to trouble.
Indeed.
Also, to anything that sets up as a hatred of some set of characteristics. I feel a tremendous sympathy towards anybody who is gay in our culture, and anybody who is transgender, anybody who finds themselves somewhere in the spectrum that is considered to be, abnormal.
Yeah.
And the truth is that there is no normal.
No, there is no normal.
Normal is an attempt made in the 1950s to force culture of a certain type.
And then hence all of a sudden you've got the insult where a boy will be insulted by going, "Oh, you run like a girl." Or I even saw that.
Yeah, but hang on a minute. Have you watched girls running? You know what I mean?
Yeah, some of them run pretty good. What was the gal who then died?
I'm all for, actual complete sexual equality. So I think all sports, this idea of having men's and women's sports is just wrong.
I don't know. I've never even thought. I do remember when I was in 7th grade as a child, and we were just starting wrestling, and I had no idea. And I asked, why are we splitting up into the boys and the girls? Why can't we just all pick a wrestling partner by just our general weight and strength? And the gym teacher just gave me, I still remember that look too.
I think by 7th grade, wrestling between boys and girls might get a bit difficult.
I was a late bloomer.
But it does, I think it does, returning to the theme that there are probably people who've been so odious that we do need to label them. Robert E. Lee's
label but not cancel. There's a difference, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we. But what would cancelling be? Would it be that we know, when we say that Robert E. Lee was approached to become the commander of the Union Army because he was recognized as the greatest general of his time, and he turned that down? Should we talk about Stonewall Jackson actually having retired and feeling that he had to protect, the rights of the Southerners to leave the Union? That seemed a legal right. And, we have this polarized debate about slavery and this lie that Civil War was about slavery. It was not. 2 of the northern states, Maryland was one of them, I don't remember the other, actually held slaves, but they joined the northern side to prevent the Confederacy from leaving the Union. The manumission of slaves, the Emancipation Proclamation, was in 1863, 2 years after the war started.
So you
So
don't see in their documents, they do actually say we are the entire mission statement is that the that the Negro is inferior. They say that in a couple different states where they were pulling away, and this is all what we're really about. But I'd say that it wasn't not about slavery, but it wasn't all about slavery. I would say that it was a lot more complex, and that there were many, many, many different reasons. And
there were, but I don't think that the sympathy of the white people of the North for the slaves really was a significant reason.
I don't think
Because
it was.
if
I
it
think it was
was,
part
then
of it.
by now, 150 years later, by now, then there would be no prejudice against black
You're right.
people in the North.
Yeah.
Back to the Mason-Dixon line was already there, you know, but
Yeah.
the people were capturing blacks in the North and returning them as slaves was also happening. It's
Also,
not an area of
quote a
history that
neighbor of
I know in any
mine.
depth, but I
Also, to
do.
quote a neighbor of mine who was born in the deep South and then came up here, she said, "I never heard the N-word till I moved to New England."
Sure. And it's called You England now, so they don't have to use the N-word.
Yeah. Um, that's the thing is canceling to me bespeaks of we're just shoving it away. We're never ever going to look. We're never going to watch that Tom Cruise movie ever again. We're never going to listen to Wagner again. We're going to, if we were canceling, I would probably put a piece of tape over Colin Baker over here because he ruined the franchise. Excuse me, because he ruined the franchise as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, that's a word that we will be taking out.
Yes.
Because it's not permitted on our channel, because this is child friendly.
I was going to hope to maybe
Yeah, you'll have to now.
put it at, I was going to hope to cut the whole thing out, but now I'm just going to have to remove that word. Thank you.
Now you're in trouble.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I agree with you. We can't cancel things, but it's a matter of, I can understand the distress that somebody feels when they say, I've been mistreated. My
Yes.
parents were mistreated. My grandparents mistreated. I'm one of, 11 million people were
The
imported.
rage is coming
And,
from a
and the
real
point
place.
that I was trying to make about Christopher Columbus about a year ago in this conversation is that Christopher Columbus, I don't know if it's known to our audience generally, but the introduction of slavery in the modern sense comes with Christopher Columbus, who asked for a papal decree and permission from the Spanish crown to enslave the Carib people. All that is left of the Carib people is the name Caribbean, because they were exterminated.
Yeah.
And one can understand that, talking about Columbia, pre-Columbia,
Yeah,
this word is, and the whole idea of Columbus Day, and this is an affront to all Native Americans.
as is the fat Jackson on our $20 bill.
Yeah, or Jefferson, or Washington, slaveholders. And there's the point, from the other side, you say that we are, if we're quiescent about people who committed evil, then we're also in trouble. So it's a matter of explaining who they are and what they are, and perhaps finding paragons of virtue, people who actually we know did contribute. I mean, Jefferson was a brilliant, brilliant man. The Bill of Rights is one of the great documents of human history.
Yeah.
It did not apply to women, and it did not apply to blacks or Native Americans. Native Americans in 1876, because of this, I did get into in some depth, because a group called the Ponca, who lived between the Cheyenne and the Lakota in the plains, they'd been moved from their lands, and one group of them decided, well, a father had lost 4 children, basically. All 4 of his sons had died on the reservation, perhaps from smallpox blankets that were deliberately put there. And when his oldest son died, he said, "Take me home to bury me." And so they went with a wagon, and about 50 of them within that particular family group. And they managed to get 500 miles before they caught them, which is quite incredible because they had a wagon, but they were hanging out with their friends, the Omahas, when they were caught, and they were then taken into custody. And a peculiarity of history is that General Crook, who led the extermination of the Plains Indians, by this time had enough. This is it's quite early on. The Indian War would end in 1890 with Wounded Knee. So this is in 1875, and Crook's had enough. He worked for Sherman in the destruction of the South, which is one of the most criminal offences committed in warfare. And then Sherman becomes the director of Indian Affairs, having burned the South out under Ulysses S. Grant as president. And Crook goes along to a newspaperman and says, what about habeas corpus? So it's Crook, it's the man who's actually been running this campaign, he's had enough. And a lawyer issues a writ of habeas corpus saying, why have you arrested these people? Well, they left the reservation. I'm afraid that's not a crime.
Yeah.
And they, to this day, that Ponca group are back where they came from. The next year, Congress determined that Native Americans were not human beings and were therefore not protected by the law. And that was the case until 1933, I believe.
Even in my schooling, around about 1980 or so, we were still taught that 1890 was the opening of the West, and the West was one. And the restoration in the South, the African Americans who became senators and such didn't succeed because they couldn't handle the responsibility. My 8th grade social studies teacher actually dropped that in class because we still didn't understand. We still do. Mount Rushmore is still hailed as a wonderful thing rather than the rape of a sacred mountain. Let's carve a bunch of faces of white men into the sacred mountain after stealing the land.
Which is, I'm told, falling apart now.
I didn't know that. Good that it is.
Well, who knows? I mean, one could also say that the Lakota had only got there a couple of hundred years before, and they'd taken the sacred mountains from the people who were there before, just as the Apache came down from Alaska and
that's true. I mean, if you're going to get into that, none of us are native to this continent.
Well, it's a matter of time. The British Isles are inhabited originally by two groups of people, one coming from what is now the Ukraine and the other from the Middle East. So the native Britons,
the original pasty white people.
Well, there you go. But let's get really political about it. I saw some spokesman for Israel the other night talking about the biblical right to a country in Palestine, and it makes my blood boil. Israel is a fact. It's not going to go away. It's happened. We've somehow got to deal with it. But the idea that the Welsh could say, look, till 500 AD, we were living in London. We want it back. It somehow doesn't work for me. The idea that the Scots have all got to go back to Ireland and the Picts, wherever they are, have got to go back, that the North Africans have got to go back to the Russian steppe, that,
England would be hella crowded.
The French are invaders. The Gauls are the people.
England and Germany would be overcrowded if all the folks who came and whose blood, and where do I go? I'm roughly half and half English and German. Where am I supposed to go if I'm supposed to go back to where I came from?
North Sea.
Oh, okay. I did not just chop off half of me,
No, that would be cruel. I live in the North Sea.
In Eastern
It is quite cold there.
Oh, God. Well, actually, I could deal with that today. What was it, 97?
Well, that's about 4 minutes, it said, in the water of the North Sea, but before the hypothermia sets in. But again, a lot of this is the problem of differentiation, the idea that I am different to you, and that we are not part of, I was talking with Sam the other day, and you'll be looking at that soon, but some people tell me that the evidence is not good enough anymore, but some years ago, the mitochondrial DNA, the DNA of the mitochondrial bacteria that live in human cells, and without which we could not exist. So let's not get racist about mitochondria here. But because they provide a clock genetically, placentas were taken from all over the world to see if there was a common origin. And that origin was found 238,000 years ago, everybody in the mitochondria, the mitochondrial Eve, which indicates that we're all part of the same family. And we're all black. We're all different shades of black.
I always say we're like Galapagos sparrows. We've all developed these different little variations to whatever environment we came in.
You think of the finch, the Galapagos, the Darwin's finch?
Yeah, basically that different islands of humanity have gotten different little bits, like the little extra fold for an Asian eye, because the snow on the steppes, they needed something to keep them from going snowblind. Or you and I, we couldn't get as much vitamin D as we needed from the sun, so we got all of our melanin removed. Over the African nose that's a little flatter and wider in order to cool the air as it comes in from the desert. We're all developed to the environment that our most recent ancestors did, but really we're all still the same breed. We just got a little bit of extra bells and whistles based on where bits of family cropped up into.
Yeah, I mean, there's so we're dealing with individual variations, but those individual variations are far more individual than that. Because there's also sexual selection whereby there is a choice to have, long-necked people or something like that, and and you can then because you can't separate out the old-fashioned genetic rules that we were taught at school have read-only genes which are selfish and they want to replicate themselves. Well, it's not true. You can write on a gene. There's epigenetics, and you can change within a single generation. You can change within a single day. Then you have the symbolic evolution, and all of these things are built together. They're not distinct channels affecting something. They are interacting at all times.
Exactly.
Right. Our talks with Yuval have shown, hopefully with some clarity.
I have learned so much about genetics and evolution just in the past few months, editing all those pieces with Yuval. They're amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the great privilege of spending 5 years talking with him almost every week, looking over how to present the ideas that he's developed. Those ideas come from Eva Jablonka and other evolutionary biologists, and they undermine completely what is being taught in our schools today still, even though this material has been with us for 20 years. I mean, epigenetics has been with us for 40 years as a proven fact, but it's much easier to teach children this nonsense.
Oversimplified. It's this one thing rather than a multitude of factors.
And what we say and how we act becomes part of our evolution. And if we act in a hateful way, then that becomes part of our evolution. So, look at the perversity at the moment of people going on marches to protest against wearing masks to protect themselves from COVID-19. And you say, well, evolution is going to do something about this.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to make there be less of these people. That would seem to be what is happening in the United States at the moment.
Yes. All the states that opened, all the states that opened too early had parties on the beaches. We're now seeing spikes where they're going. I will say that hate and the rage at perceived injustices or real injustices is very real. And that's what's at the back of a lot of these things of wanting to cancel something, is because we're angry. Those women that raised me as a teenager, and it wasn't just my mom's, it was all the whole tribe of their friends, they were angry. I mean, I've got a little record book of my school that back from the 70s, There was, what do you want to be when you grow up, which the child was to check. And there were still, in the mid-1970s, separate checklists for boys and girls. And I could wish to be a nurse or a teacher or a homemaker. No, it wasn't even homemaker, it was housewife. I could choose to be these things, and a boy could choose to be these things. And then when I started playing stand-up bass, all the crap that I received, you can't play bass, bass isn't a girl's instrument, or you can't do this, or the substitute teacher who came in and we ran a little boys versus girls, but he put girls versus men, and we had to earn our right to be called women. By being, I forget, it wasn't even an even thing. We had to go twice as well as the boys before we could be called women rather than girls. And in our culture, you don't call a grown man a boy, but girls, we're all girls. Or
Well,
even when I was
actually, black men were usually referred to as boy, which is which is why the term man.
Yeah.
Black men started calling one another man, and it then leaked into white culture because they were sick of being called boy.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a lot of women who are sick and tired of being called girl or chick or this bit of, a bit of skirt, a bit of, I'm walking down the hallway, two painters over me going, hey, yeah, the scenery's real good here. Because that's all we were, was a bit of scenery. We weren't another person with thoughts and feelings and desires.
How do you take then the Sex and the City attitude, the ladette attitude?
Yeah, that's another bit of, are they dehumanizing the boy? Because I don't like that either. I don't think that just because it's been done to you, you shouldn't do it to somebody else. You shouldn't be dehumanizing people, but I can understand that it was needed to be shown that women could do this, could be sexual too, and could go out and explore their own sexuality without having to tie themselves down to a relationship. It would just be nice to do that without dehumanizing the other.
Can it be done?
I don't know. In another couple 10,000 years, anything's possible. I think we've come a long way. I think the fact that we're having these conversations now shows that it is possible, but probably not within our lifetimes, and probably not for still a couple more eons of striving towards, and who knows what that's going to look like.
Well, hopefully not eons.
No.
But you're aware of the polyandrous culture in Ladakh, for example.
Yes.
So we are talking about cultural effects. I start to worry because, for example, as a child, I had a facility for imitating voices from the age of 5.
Mm-hmm.
I could pick up pretty much any accent. By the time I was in my late 20s, I started having to become cautious because it had become politically incorrect to impersonate people from other cultures. It was somehow viewed as insulting to do this. And it makes me feel uneasy because when I'm imitating a voice, I'm imitating a voice. I'm not saying that Scottish people are stupid.
No, and you're
I'm
not
just imitating a particular voice.
Yeah. You're not pretending that all Scottish people are like this. You are just imitating the music of that you hear.
Yeah, and I think we have come into a problematical place in terms of what isn't allowed in communication,
or even in so-called cultural appropriation.
So, to take the specific example you've given, I have been in places where women have said, well, we'll leave you boys alone. And the boys are of any age. And nobody was upset about that.
Okay, fair enough. And I can see that. However, when something has been used over and over again, back when I was in graduate school, the men's choir had their Florida tour, and they produced this T-shirt for this tour, Florida short tour, that was basically a rape joke. It was a woman grabbing hold of her breasts, running away from cartoon versions of the men's choir. Hold on to your coconuts, we're coming to Florida. And you could see by her face, she was not tee-hee, we're chasing fun. It was, if I don't run, these guys are going to sexually assault me and I have to hold on to my coconuts. And in it, when I was discussing this with a male friend, he kept deliberately going, many girls I know, and he'd accent it to show that, and he kept on referring to the males as men and the women as girls in order to show that the girls were still girls and the men were men.
But the girls had coconuts, apparently?
It was for breasts.
I think I've understood. But
oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the upshot is, I agree with
it's intent. If it's just, hi, boys, and there's no intent, but I have heard it as in, there has been, I think it's all intent, and the problem is that we get too stuck up on noises and not the intent behind the noises.
And what would be your take on Lenny Bruce and his famous routine?
I love that. Yeah, I love that, because that shows that I got in trouble when I was a little kid because I just saw a kid who I wanted to know exactly which part of Asia his relatives had come from. Not meaning to degrade him or anything like that. I just wanted to know so that I could recognize those features and go, oh, your family's from Korea. That's nifty. I've heard about Korea. Rather than, but of course, because I asked, it was like, oh no, you can't ask that. You can't ask that. Whereas really, I've met some people. There was one gal that I thought was so beautiful. She was half Polynesian and half Korean. And I thought, why should it be impolite to ask, hey, where are your people from on this planet? But unfortunately has been used to degrade too. So I can understand the rage behind it, but I also can understand that some people take it a little bit too. That's the problem, is people take things too far and take offense where no offense was meant. And yet those who do mean offense will then come along and do backlash to go that, oh, political correct, it's all so wrong. We can't say the N-word anymore. We can't call people retards.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one that travels, that the terms the insult terms that are used are moderated as they leave the language. So
yeah,
people with Down syndrome were called Mongoloid because it was thought that they looked like Mongolian people. Now, is that insulting to Down syndrome people? Is it insulting to Mongolians? But that became Mongs. And so we had a word there, and we had to move away from using the expression because it had become insulting. But it still described the same thing. If you look to the word idiot, it's a technical term meaning an IQ of less than 54. The word moron, an IQ of less than 80, and a word that was in fact invented, I think, by Binet himself, who invented IQ testing, in no derogatory meaning.
No.
He was saying, the average intelligence is 100. In fact, I don't think he said that, because Binet didn't believe that you could test one person against another when he invented the testing. It was to measure the progress, in fact, in morons, in their education, which was a perfectly fine word. The word spastic, which when I was a child became spasmo, became an insult term. So terms, move their meaning. Then they're replaced by another word, which will be the proper word. And then within 10 years, you've got to replace them again. And it's a recognition of a certain type or class of person that then becomes insulting. And it becomes difficult at times to know, so the National Association of Coloured People, the word coloured is no longer an appropriate term.
Just thinking that, yeah, because now I'm very careful to say African American, but it's really stupid because what if I'm 50 miles north in Canada? Do I call him African Canadian? No, he says he's black. And am I being disrespectful to call him black? Of course, Vermont is notoriously Caucasian, so that when somebody asked me, well, what do you call them? I said, the Andersons. Because there was just one family in my school, and it's like...
And African Americans, when I was younger, were called Afro-Americans. And then that became a derogatory term. And I can understand it, but there's a problem of disinclusion, whatever label we use. I have a friend whose parents are both from the West Indies. He is black and he is English. And that's simple. What he thinks about himself, what I think about him is he's English because he grew up within the culture. I understand living in an island where we know that we started, with you, most people probably don't know, we started with people from the Ukraine and the Middle East. And then we had the Celts, probably. There are some arguments about that. Then the Romans came along for a few hundred years and interbred because the Romans didn't have these racist differentiations. The only people the Romans had trouble with were the Jews, it appears, who Titus decided he was going to try and do something about it. But that led to the mythology of the diaspora, which never actually happened. And it's very likely that genetically, the original inhabitants of the state of Israel are the modern Palestinians, whose culture is quite different from Arabs around them. But they converted. That's what happened. Whereas the Jewish religion grew throughout the empire. But after the Romans, when they, having interbred, went off in the 4th century to defend Rome from the barbarians, that is, people who spoke a foreign language to Greek and sound as if they were saying bar, that we then got Angles, Saxons, and Jutes from contemporary Germany and Denmark. And then we got Vikings or Danes, and on and on and on. So we're in a culture that got very mixed up during that time. We then imported Huguenots from France when Protestants there were being killed. Jews, the Jews particularly of Leeds, for example, and of London. We have a complete Haredi community in London, which is kind of weird. Kids who are brought up to the age of 16 without speaking English, without learning anything other than material in Hebrew, which is against the law here. And they got caught a few years ago. But this idea of what a culture is, the education system in the United States, universal education, was introduced in the 1880s with the idea of homogenizing the culture. Now, my friend's English, but if you live in America, you're an Italian American, you're a Greek American, you're a Vietnamese American, that the ghettoization continues and the cultures don't seem to have intermixed, except when it comes to this notion that you're black people, which means your ancestors could have come from any part of West Africa, let's face it. They were captured by other black people.
A lot of those folks also have a fair amount of European blood in them too.
Well, inevitably, because the only people who were well enough to breed were the house slaves, who were the women who were kept because they were attractive to the vicious white owners. And so blood, and you probably know Saint-Georges. You're probably one of the few people who knows who Saint-Georges was. Maybe not. There's a part of a Mozart violin concerto which is directly lifted from a piece written by Saint-Georges. Saint-Georges was regarded as the finest violinist in France in the 18th century and the greatest swordmaster. His father was a French nobleman and his mother was a slave, which meant that he couldn't marry anybody. Because he had no class, no caste, nothing he could do. But he was one of the most accomplished human beings of the generation.
It's
a black man, a composer.
Also silly because we are, as you say, we're all, at the end of the day, we're all African. I forget which show it was it was a wonderful one back in the beginning of the Human Genome Project. And they had a sample of 1,000 people in Queens, and then had them all staged in a New York park on a map of the world, and had them walk backwards in time through from wherever their most recent ancestors were. Okay, everybody in England, now walk over back to Ukraine. Okay, everybody in Ukraine, now walk back over to, until everybody was until they had everybody walk backwards to spot in Africa, humanity, welcome home. And that was the point in the broadcast that I burst into tears, because you know me, I can cry over a dog food commercial. But I think what I like best is the Emily Dickinson line. He drew a line to draw me out. I drew a circle to draw him in. And if we remember that it's not the other. Yes, there's a lot of injustice that's gone on, but we need to draw people in, not out.
Yeah, and what our grandparents did to each other. I mean, John Campbell Jr., who I had to research in some depth because he was the guy that introduced Ron Hubbard to the world through astounding science fiction and through the publication of Dianetics, the Evolution of a Science. And Campbell was approached by a black man who was, and this would have been in the 50s or 60s, who was quite angry with him and saying, your ancestors did horrible things to my ancestors. And he stopped him. He said, no, they didn't. My grandfather came from Scotland. We never owned slaves. We were part of the huge movement in Britain to stop slavery. 400,000 people in the 18th century signed petitions to stop slavery. But because slavers basically controlled the parliament through rotten boroughs where they could buy votes, it took a long time.
Yeah.
But it eventually did happen. But it's understanding that, and he then turned to the black man and said, but you probably have the blood of a slaver in you.
Yeah. Well, even if your ancestors did. My maternal grandfather was a horrible racist. On vacations, when I got dropped off at his house, he'd drive me on the way to the airport through the poor part of town and say, this is where the colored people live. And it was like he was so showing, this is where those people live. Lock the doors, because you don't know. They might play good music at you, who knows? Or serve you some really good barbecue ribs. Anybody who's been in Toledo knows that the African community there, that's where you go to get your good barbecue. And the
what we should no longer be calling the African community.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. You see, I slip up because I was born in the 60s. And
it's impossible not to, because, but if we then look at the notion of like an Aryan race, which is where this all goes, we are looking at an absolute fiction. One of the recent, last year, graves were found among the Vikings, who are considered to be pure Aryans, which showed that Sami, so-called Laplanders, were buried in the same ritual way, that they'd been accepted completely into these people. So the one thing you can say about the Vikings, they were a bit vicious at times. They didn't wear horned helmets.
Nope, they didn't.
They did eat horse penises, believing it would make them more virile.
So did the French.
There you go. Meat and 2 veg. They weren't racist. But then if you look at somebody who is, and you look at the notion of blue blood among the aristocracy of Europe, this idea that you've got to maintain the purity of the blood, and you start getting diseases like porphyry.
And Philip II of Spain. Is it Philip II of Spain? The guy who's most chin? Philip IV. Yeah, the guy who's
the Habsburg chin. But you also get a disease like porphyry, which is what drove George III mad, which Queen Victoria suffered from, which the Kaiser's sister, she was locked up for a lifetime, which one of the uncles of our current Queen was suffered from this. Now it's a curable disease, but it's passed on. And what happens is through the interbreeding, and anybody that studies Aryan genetics should get hold of this idea, through interbreeding, you will get a weakening. You will get deficiencies and deformities if you look, for example, of
King Tut
Juan,
couldn't even stand up.
I'm sorry?
Tut, Tutankhamun, could barely stand up.
Yeah, and lived to be 19 years old.
Yeah.
And this was because the pharaohs married their own sisters. So, didn't do too well there.
It's amazing to me Cleopatra could do anything at all, with being a late generation told me.
But we come to a situation where inbreeding is a well-recognized condition and exists in certain valley cultures all over the place.
Yeah.
And that we know the other thing that's true is that if you bring more genetic material in, so for example, the banana is very likely to go extinct because there is only the Cavendish strain. Even though there are red bananas and yellow bananas, they only have one genetic origin. It's quite likely that in the next 100 years, the banana will cease to be grown. It's all right. You won't live that long. Don't worry. Well, you probably won't. You won't live to be 100. You won't live to be 100 and whatever. Oh, no, we're allowed to say girls' ages now, aren't we? It's not a taboo to say how old
and proud of it. Yeah, I've always hated that.
You probably won't live to be 153. No, I hate to bring that home to you because nobody's lived past 127 that we know of yet. The daughter of the post office guy in Arles, who was painted by Van Gogh, she lived to be over 100. So maybe there's something.
Well, I didn't take care of my body well enough to even make it past 80. I'm sure.
Well, there's still time, but
yeah.
The point is that if you then look at the mango, there are 2,000 varieties of mango. There are 900 varieties of apple. These things will persist, but they'll also continue to be interbred for the best possible characteristics. And if you look at the breeding of wolves and the idea that you can get a Chihuahua by doing that, you can get a pug.
Against Chihuahuas? I saw that in a video when I almost phoned you. Said, "What do you got against Chihuahuas?"
They're yappy.
I knew somebody who had I've known 2 Chihuahua Jack Russell mixes. You want to talk a hyper dog?
Why? Why do I want to talk a hyper dog? I've known Jack Russells that were quite remarkable. When I was a kid, I used to go stay in this farm. I was about 14, and the farmer had a companion who ran away with a guy with the circus, and they left behind his Jack Russell, which was a trained circus dog. And you'd be out playing ball, kicking a ball around, and this dog would run onto the lawn, grab the ball, and put it on its nose.
Oh yeah, Jack Russells are amazing, but they are also terribly neurotic if not raised properly.
I think that inbreeding is something that when you look to dogs,
and there's exactly, look at dog breeds. Look at the way in Newfoundlands live incredibly short lifetimes for dogs because their lungs go out. My mom's always have poodles, and they get rescue poodles, so they're good at, they're responsible on that. They don't contribute to the puppy mill problem, but poodles have hip problems. Boston Terriers, their eyes are liable to pop out,
and
because of inbreeding. And for all my blue eyes and white skin, I was actually very disappointed to find out that I didn't have any recent African ancestry and no recent. I thought I had a recent African ancestry until we did that 23andme.com and found out that I'm just a bunch of Western, Eastern, and Southern Europe.
Yeah, I must say I don't find their testing credible.
No.
No.
I actually had a good laugh when they sent me an email telling me that I might be related to somebody with my mother's name.
Incredible.
And then they showed me that I might be related to my father. I'm still waiting for them to tell me whether or not I'm related to my sister.
Probably not. But again, with dogs, you have the King Charles Spaniel, where the brain case is too small for the brain, And so
My goodness.
some years ago, about 15 or 20 years ago, the BBC stopped showing the famous Crufts Dog Show because there was so much protest that there were breeds that were actually, all of the pushed in face dogs have breathing problems.
Yeah.
Now, that's what the Aryan race leads to. It leads to people like Hitler, are completely nuts.
And yeah, a whole bunch of folks that come from places that there's a lot in southern Ohio and northern Kentucky is called the incest capital of the United States. And I've actually heard a prosecutor, a state prosecutor has said, whenever I see a guy from southern Ohio with a Bible, I know I'm dealing with a sexual assault case.
Okay. Without, seeking to be
generalization
to any general population. Let's just cancel that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, where does I was just about to say that dog show seems to me to be a good example of canceling. The fact that they canceled the cakewalk with at least the face painting or the blackface, canceling that, but not canceling maybe somebody who was 19 at the time.
Or Al Jolson in The Jazz Singer, a Jewish man doing blackface. He got the worst of both worlds going on, it would seem. But yet he managed to become one of the most famous people in the world.
Yeah. Okay. How about the woman who famously lost her job for tweeting, "I'm going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, lol, just kidding, I'm white." Her life's over. She's now unemployable. Should she always be? If she came up and said, "I'm really, really sorry, I have now learned better," and demonstrated something about, I don't know. I do know that I can say, like, I know that there's still a bit of me that does see color. And I'm going to say it. It was one of the horrible things. I don't know whether it's horrible or wrong, but when I see somebody with darker skin, I usually try to give them a smile, an extra smile, because I know that there's enough racist assholes out there that have treated them badly because of this color of their skin. So I just want to balance it out.
Go and watch Richard Pryor talking about this very subject of how patronizing you white folks is.
Well, I don't mean to be patronizing, though it probably is.
You really do need to watch Richard Pryor.
I know. And I know that it's horrible, but that's the sort of thing. It's called white guilt, I believe.
Yeah, something like,
And is it condescending? It probably is. I'm probably doing it very, very wrong. Am I meaning to be harmful? Hell no. I want to make up for I really honestly want to make up for some of the stuff. The horrible stuff that people like me, people related to me, have done.
Let's round this up with we shared a song called "Skin Deep" by Buddy Guy, and let's put a link to that on this to end the discussion, because I personally think that Buddy Guy expressed that particular problem very well in that song. And Buddy Guy's Jimi Hendrix went up to him and he said, "I learned so much from you." And Buddy Guy looked at him and he said, "So where's the check?"
We all learn from each other.
Go and listen to Buddy Guy and you'll see why somebody like Jimi Hendrix, who is regarded universally as the great electric guitar player, learned from Buddy Guy. Buddy Guy is an astonishing, still playing in his 80s, still an astonishing guitar player. But I think we've
gotten a little bit away from the gender issues and more into racial issues, but I do think that they are kind of intertwined in how we react.
We're talking about cancel culture, so you can't not talk about at the moment with Black Lives Matter, which we support as long as it's not.
I will say, when I was in graduate school, I did hear some women of color, African Americans, however, some women talking about how, as Black women, they felt like they had to choose between supporting their team of being Black people or their team of being women, because there were some cases where You know, there were black men who were very, very misogynistic, but should they support them because they need to support the team? And I
And
think that's the
look
biggest
at
fallacy.
the tremendous support for O.J. Simpson when he got away with murder, because the black
Yes,
community had been so violated
yeah, that
so
of
thoroughly
course.
that the idea that a black man could get away, that you know,
Yeah,
I don't really think of O.J. Simpson as a black man, I
yeah.
must say.
He was a rich man, and once you get above a certain million mark, it doesn't matter if you're
Yeah,
freaking purple.
yeah,
This is why I've dyed my hair purple.
which is good to know. But I think we've bored the
Yeah.
audience to death by now. So I have been, and hopefully will continue to be. Look, this is Boris Johnson here, and he's saying, Dominic, we're saying to him, take back control from Dominic Cummings.
Woo.
And this over here is Socrates. He's been sitting wisely listening to
Oh,
all of it.
very nice. I still say you should hang that from the ceiling, but
What, hang Boris Johnson?
yeah, so like a mobile, so he can sit like a little. I don't know. I
Cool.
know that
It's a suggestion. I don't
Stan's
like the
on.
man, but I don't want to hang him, you know. Yeah,
Stan's on.
we're
Where's
having
Stan?
problems with the sign, you know.
Where's Stan?
Sorry?
Stan Zabowski.
Oh, he decided he didn't actually want to partake in this conversation in case there was anything anti-Semitic.
Orange lump. That's my Stan over there, Stanley.
Oh,
Oh yeah, yep. There he goes.
he's going to sit with Socrates now. So
Okay.
anyway, I'm John Atack.
And I'm Spike Robinson. Oh no!